Professor Hesh, are we ready to go?
Uh, Let me see. What time is it?
Yeah. I think it's time to start. And my first question, Professor Hesh, is what do you tell your students on the first day of class that they always forget?
They always forget. Before you get into all the sophisticated planning techniques you can do to save income taxes, spend the first half an hour asking the client all sorts of, about your family, about your business, how you started up your business, and get the whole family history. Let the client do all the talking for the first half hour.
And why is that important?
Because too many of us, we're so proud of all the income taxes and estate planning to save estate taxes that we can do, that we don't take into account. If we get right into all that stuff, we don't take into account what does the client want. We almost tell the client, this is what you want. And the most important thing is, what does the client want?
Why would anyone care what the client wants? Isn't it all about us?
Well, I don't know. You're putting me in a...
Jerry, these puppets, they just have a mind of their own. What can we say?
I guess so.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We've got a little bit over 100 attendees, which is nice for a Saturday at 11 o'clock where we gave 1 day notice. This is Alan Gassman. I have my mentor and a great superhero of the estate planning world, Professor Jerry Hesh here. He's also one heck of a nice guy. And I thought it would be nice to talk about estate planning 101. And like Jerry said, so many of us are math geeks and we want to do all this cool stuff. And a lot of times it's easy to forget about the basics. And sometimes the clients are a little bit flustered and we're talking about internal revenue code provisions and how much estate tax to pay. And we just forget the basics. And then my ulterior motive, I'm still developing estate view software with Jerry, and we're starting to do a client intake portal, which I'll show people towards the end of this. And, these basics are certainly coming to light. Now, for those of you attending, this program is not registered for continuing education credit. If you're a lawyer or an accountant, I can give you a certificate of completion, which may be worth the paper that it's written on, but not qualified for continuing education credit otherwise. Now, next Saturday, Jerry, I don't know if you can join, but next Saturday, I'm going to do Estate Planning 102. And I'm just going to cover more things, and we're going to look at your questions and suggestions for that. A lot of people are using now Estate View software, but if you'd like to use it for free for the next 48 hours, put estateview.link in your browser and then do a backslash and then the secret code Jerry Hesh, JERYHESCH, don't tell anybody, and then you'll have free use of Estate View software for 48 hours. Otherwise, we no longer are doing a 30-day free trial. We're just doing a 30-day money-back guarantee to keep the people serious. Our book, the Corporate Transparency Act Guide, I'll sell it to you today for $1 because a court on Wednesday declared this law to be unconstitutional. And I don't know how the Trump administration is going to feel about this Corporate Transparency Act law. The deadline was December 31st. In my opinion, and I've published this, you don't have to file by December 31st because a Texas judge says it's unconstitutional. I think we'll have a reasonable period of time to file. If another judge declares it to be constitutional, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal is looking at it. The 5th Circuit Court of Appeal is looking at it. Eventually, the Supreme Court may look at it. 5 million entities have registered on the FinCEN website. It's been a lot of work, and now the law may be taken away for one reason or the other. We shall see. Also, to key in with the concept of basic estate planning, our book, 8 Steps to a Proper Florida Trust Plan, we are making this available as one of the handouts right now. So you can just get this out of the handout or send me an email and I'll send you a free uh, PDF of this book, because we do try to cover the basics of estate planning in the book. Also, if you go to YouTube, click on this link or look up Gassman Fun with Dick and Jane, and there's a 60-minute video that we did on basic estate planning, going into what's a trust, what's a will, what is joint with right of survivorship, how do IRAs work. That I'm not going to cover because I see the people who are in the audience today. I know that most of you are estate planning professionals, and a lot of you are clients and laymen who really know your stuff. But if you want the basics or you want to share the basics, then the Fun and with Dick and Jane slides are very, very good, and they're also at the end of the slide deck. Also on the estate tax planning area, if you go to the website for Estate View, which is estateview.info, and click on the video library, and then we have a videotape. We have a video that you can watch on almost every planning technique. So you might find that to be helpful. So Jerry, what are you thinking that I should make sure to mention it at this point while we talk about basic estate planning?
The most important thing in basic estate plan is to get all of the necessary information. And one of the problems in getting all the necessary information is if you do it in a meeting with the client, it could take up to an hour, believe it or not. And the client's going to say, are you billing for this hour? And, they're going to feel uncomfortable, So what the most important thing is, a lot of the basic information that you need doesn't need to be disseminated to you in a face-to-face meeting. And Alan is going to show you, here is a nice little thing that you can give to the clients that will basically save them a lot of time, where they gather all the information and they don't have to have you bill for it.
So Jerry said some important things. And by the way, anyone watching this, I'm glad to give you our PDF or Word version of our intake form, which I'm very proud of. I worked pretty hard on it with a guy named David Finkel, who's a Wall Street Journal recognized author. David has a company called Maui Mastermind, and he wanted to make it easier for his clients to get their estates plan. So I sent him my intake form, and he goes, "This is way too complicated. You can get the same information in a simpler way." So this is our intake form, and I don't ask for every piece of information that somebody could give me, because I do want the client to not be too intimidated. I want them to get in the door, but I also want the proper information, and I want to protect myself that I asked for the proper information. Later on, you can go to Estate View and see where we are as far as making this a computerized process where prompts come up. So in other words, one of the questions in Estate View is who owns your cars and who drives your cars? And then a red thing can come up and say, why is anyone driving your car other than you? That's exposing you to liability. Or another question that comes up in Estate View is who are your parents? Okay. And then are you going to inherit from them? Yes or no? Or are you going to support them? Yes or no? And would you like a new fair market value income tax basis when mom or dad dies on your assets? Yes or no? So thinking through, for those of you who are planners and advisors, your questions in these forms should be not only efficient, but also to some extent interesting, so that the client is giving thought to things that are important. For example, go
More
ahead, Jerry.
important, more importantly, we can't in the initial client meeting, which is not going to last more than an hour or maybe a little bit more. You can't think of everything that you're going to do. Okay, it's virtually impossible because even if you got a list that you try to ask for it. And Alan raised a very important question: is something about your parents and how would you like to get an income tax free step up in basis at death when you're still alive? And the answer is going to be, to the extent your parents still have available estate tax exemption, give your parents a general power of appointment over some of your appreciated assets. So it's included in your parents' estate. But the nice thing about it is, Alan just said, there's a question there that gives you a prompt for that. So it's just a way of a very practical way of organizing all that you need to do in a very efficient manner with the least amount of time that you have to devote to it.
Right, okay. Right. When I taught my law school course on client relationships and giving advice at Stetson Law School, the first thing I told them was make eye contact with the person you're talking to long enough so that you know the color of their eyes, smile, tell them that you're very glad to meet them and very interested in helping them. And I always start off with a very broad question, and that is, how can I help you today? What's important to you? What do you want to make sure that we're going to cover? Because what's important to me is not necessarily what's important to the client. So this initial hour, and as Jerry said, you may only have an hour, is very much about setting up a rapport with the client. I want the client to feel, very comfortable that they can tell me what their issues are and what they'd like to have covered. And no two clients and no 10 married couples have the same agenda. The second thing that I want to do is I will know within 5 to 8 minutes whether the client is a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinetic learner. And that is very helpful to me. And one of the big cues is the person will say to you, oh, I see what you mean. Oh, I see that. Or I hear what you're saying. Or how does that all come together? Because once I know if the client is visual, then I'll talk in terms of visual and use prompts and draw pictures. If the client's auditory, I'm going to slow down a little bit and make sure that my speech patterns pretty much match what the client speech patterns are. If the client's kinetic, then I'm going to address things as if they are built. So, getting that rapport with the client and making sure that the client is comfortable with what you are talking about is really important. And simply asking the client, what do you think your estate plan should do? Who are you going to take care of? And usually you would assume that that's the spouse and then the descendants, but it may not always be that way. The client's perspective is oversimplified from a reality standpoint. The typical client naively believes that when he or she dies, everything can go to the surviving spouse, and that there's just nothing that's going to go wrong between that day when I die and that day 25 years later when my wife Marcia dies, and everything will then joyfully go to our children, Brent and Nicole, without any problem. Well, Jerry and I know that in the real world, I may have a future daughter-in-law or son-in-law that may be very aggressive. There may be a very aggressive investment advisor who ends up churning accounts and taking a lot of wealth. Marcia may remarry, although she swears after the experience with me she never would, but she could, and that person may give her poor advice. So, early on in the conversation, to possibly plant some seeds to say, if one of you dies, you may want to lock up a lot of the assets in a trust where the surviving spouse could be a trustee, but not be able to mess it all up. You may want to do that for your children as well. There's nothing wrong early in the conversation with telling them things like that, or having questions in the questionnaire that will prompt them to things like that, so that can sink in during the conversation. They're going to assume that you're going to handle their creditor protection and their tax planning. They're going to assume that whether you actually are or not. So in that 1 hour talk or whatever your meeting is, and I like my meetings to go as long as the client wants to go, make sure that you cover asset protection planning and make sure that you cover tax planning, because clients think that I just need a revocable trust because I went to a free lunch and I read a brochure and a lawyer somewhere told me, or a stockbroker who wanted to know all about my assets told me that I just need a revocable trust. So I want you to do a revocable trust. I'll be so happy. Now, yes, that may avoid probate. The client thinks that it avoids creditors. The client thinks that it avoids taxes. And we know that unless you do certain things certain ways, it doesn't do that. So while Jerry said it's really important that first half hour, let the client talk. Have them do most of the talking so you can see what they know and what they think they know and where they want to go. Jerry, any comments on that?
No, no. It's all getting all the necessary information in a very comfortable and efficient manner.
Right. And the other thing is, talk as little as possible. And here's what I tell my students, because it's a big mistake that I see a lot of professionals make. Yeah, I like to talk. So the client says, yes, my daughter just ran a 5-mile marathon. I'm not going to say, that's great. My daughter just ran a 10-mile marathon. I'm just going to say, that's great. I wish I could run even a mile. Your daughter is fantastic. We all have an inner child. We all need to be important. We all need to have a rapport. But this is the client's hour. This is not a time for me to brag about my children and my grandchildren. It's their hour. It's their time to shine. And you may be the only person in the universe that has the opportunity to help them with a problem. Everyone on earth, yes, all 155 of you watching this webinar and your friends have a problem. We all have a problem. And the biggest problem is usually something that is very difficult to process and understand when you're the person with the problem. So the best thing that you can do when you have a big problem is have someone that you can trust to talk about the problem, someone who cares about it, and someone who can be objective. So when I'm meeting with a client, first time, second time, third time, fifth time, 100th time, my antenna are up. what problems are out there and how can I help? And I'll give you an example. A lot of very, very wealthy, successful people have poverty complexes. Clients with $100 million net worth who drive to our office to return a self-addressed envelope so that we don't charge them for the stamp, and who are concerned, it's true, and they're concerned that they may run out of assets. Well, maybe I can help explain, showing them a Monte Carlo analysis, that the chances are you won't run out of assets. Or maybe I could encourage them to see a psychologist who specializes in that. On the other hand, we have clients who earn $500,000 a year and spend $501,000 a year. And maybe I can help them get a savings program. A lot of new clients who come to us are paying, in my opinion, way too much for certain advisors. And there is there's a financial world out there that preys on the elderly. The elderly are sometimes paying 4 to 5% a year of the value of their assets to investment advisors. I try to check out what's happening and see if I can nudge a client to somebody who I think maybe has better ethics and lower costs. So, yesterday I talked to an elderly lady who has to leave her house because of the floods in St. Petersburg, Florida. And she's about to pay a contractor way too much money for something she doesn't need. So be open to listening to the client and understand them completely. When I started practicing law 40 years ago, my mentors would always spend more time in the conference room talking about issues that were not accounting, tax, or law. They were just real issues. And please be open to that. Now, Jerry, anything you want to mention beyond what I've just said?
The stress is find out as much about the family as you can. The children or the grandchildren, what you envision for them, what they need, and how you would want to share your wealth, or not. But the most important thing is, even individuals who are not exposed to the estate and gift tax do have a certain amount of assets that they rely on. And you want to make them feel comfortable that if they live to age 100, they're not going to run out of money. Okay? And that's a very big concern. So a lot of, like, for example, right now, before the election, everybody said we have to take advantage of these two $14 million exemptions before they go away. And that's not necessarily of importance to somebody who doesn't need both exemptions. So it's just a way of understanding what the clients need.
Right. So I'll share a slide here that leads to very important conversations. I met with a couple about a week ago, and the husband is a physician. He just retired at age 59, and the net worth is about $4 million, and they're spending about $250,000 a year. So my nudge was, are you really retiring, or are you going to do consulting? Because based on your spend rate, you could run out of assets. And the wife looked at him and said, yeah, what is our plan? And he said, well, we may need to downsize the house, and I guess I do need to do some consulting. So a lot of us use just what I call a 4% rule, which is if you run a Monte Carlo analysis, and I'll talk about that later, on your investment portfolio, and you find that there is a 95% chance that if you only spend 4% of the value of that portfolio a year, you will not run out of assets. So if I die and I leave a $5 million portfolio for Marcia, and she's going to spend the equivalent of 200,000 a year, that's 4% of 5 million, and that'll go up with inflation, then we're good. But if she needs to spend 350 a year, which is more than 8% of that portfolio, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So explaining that to clients, because I could say, well, you guys have a $10 million estate. That's fantastic. You're in your 80s. You're going to die. You're going to leave 2 million to each of your 5 children. Are they okay? And what do your children have? Do you know? Do you want to leave everything equally, or is one child very wealthy and you want to leave the rest to the other children? How realistic are you being? The second question that I think is really important is, will what you're leaving people stay with them or get wasted? And if you look at the statistical studies of people who win the lottery, and by my experience with people who win the lottery, there's a 50% chance that it's all gone in 4 to 6 years. Like everything that could go wrong and that somebody could do wrong gets done. So it would be much safer for me to leave my assets to Marcia as trustee of a trust, where she is required to have a co-trustee, which might be any trust company that she would choose, or our good friend Jerry Hash, or one of our children. And she's required to meet once a year with a board certified trust and estate lawyer. That is going to have a much higher success rate than if I just put anyone, and I don't care how smart they are, a co-trusteeship with a responsible trust company or individual is much safer. Because look, Marcia's a great manager and she's pretty sophisticated and she understands how to use our advisors, but I don't know when I or she might have a stroke. I don't know when dementia may start. So just being safe rather than sorry, I think is really important. And when the client says, yes, but my son is so smart, so independent, so brilliant, so reliable, but my daughter, not so much. Okay, so then the conversation is, do you mind not treating them equally? Well, let your son be the trustee of the trust for your son, but your daughter needs to have a co-trustee. Well, don't want to offend my daughter. Okay, well, if your son is that smart, will he really mind having a co-trustee? He can go find a very low-cost trust company and they'll do it his way. And then he can't get hoodwinked by love. Because no matter how intelligent you are, you could be hoodwinked by love. And then the client says, of course, why don't I just leave it outright to my son? Well, 3 reasons. Number 1, it'll be subject to estate tax when he dies. Number 2, it'll be subject to creditor claims if he gets sued. Number 3, he might lose it in a divorce. And then the client goes, enough, the divorce part, I got it. It goes in trust. Who's the trustee going to be? So that is a really important conversation. Now, that some of them say, but I want it when he's 45, he ought to get half of it. Okay, when he's 45, if he's self-supporting, half of it will move from him and the trust company to him as sole trustee. Then the question becomes, when your son dies, you wanted him to have control, but now it's in a trust. When he dies, can he direct it to anyone other than your grandchildren and great-grandchildren? And the answer usually is nope. It has to go to our lineage. We love our daughter-in-law, but he can take care of her. Or we love our daughter-in-law, let's let her live in the house for life. But we really want this to stay in our lineage. Okay, what about charity? All right, well, that's great. He could leave part to charity. How much to charity? Well, not more than 5%, because we know some people whose son got involved with a cult that said it was a religion and charity, but it was really a cult, and that whole thing disappeared. So, so that conversation, Jerry, that I just had, what do you do with your spouse? Are you going to protect the inheritance during your spouse's lifetime? Who can you trust to be a co-trustee? What are you going to do for your children? It's good if you can squeeze that in that first hour meeting to let that sink in for them. And then, quite candidly, if they came to you from another law firm with the typical documents that empty everything out at age 35, 40, and 45, and don't handle the generation skipping tax aspect of that, then you're just going to end up remaking uh, those documents, or at least that's what I find to be the case. So Jerry, what would you add to that in a conversational way?
A lot. There's a lot there. I don't know if you can cover all of it in an hour.
Right. Now, how do you describe the GST trust planning in the first meeting with a client? And I know you have many, mega wealthy clients, and a lot of the people in this program have mega wealthy clients. So how much detail, when you meet with a billionaire and you're going to talk about a complicated estate plan, what does that hour sound like? How much detail do you go into?
I don't. I don't. Generation skipping is unfortunately uh, something that complicates what could otherwise be understandable. And all I do is say, we're going to, if you're exposed to estate tax, you're definitely going to be exposed to generation skipping tax. And you have to say, so for example, you have to give the client a simple example. And I say, look, if you leave $1 million outright to your son as a gift or as a bequest, and you're exposed to the transfer taxes, you're going to pay transfer taxes on that million. Then the son gets $1 million, and if the son leaves it to your grandson, there's a transfer tax on the son's gift to your grandson. So if you put property in trust and say life estate to my son, remainder to my grandson, the generation skipping tax will basically, after you're long gone, hit the transfer from the trust from the son to the grandson to another tax. It's called the generation skipping tax. So the key is, if I'm going to pay one tax, why should I pay a second tax when the property goes from the child to the grandchild? And the idea with generation skipping is to only have one transfer when you transfer it into a trust, so that trust will not be exposed when it goes from the son to the grandson. That's all I do with generation skipping.
So what if the client says, I'd like to leave $100 million to charity, and I'm not sure how or when or why? What is your conversation with the client in that first hour like on the
Well,
charitable planning piece?
way too many people have a nice bequest in their will that goes to their favorite charity, whether it's $100,000, $1 million, or $100 billion. Okay, and the point is that it's very nice to leave the charity. You've done what we call a mitzvah, and the key is, if you leave any money in your will to a charity at your death, it's a bequest, and that transfer is not exposed to gift taxes because you get a charitable deduction for gift tax purposes. But you don't get any income tax deduction. And wouldn't it be nice to say, I have the right to the income from that income producing asset for the rest of my life, and when I die, it goes to charity? And how would you like to get both a gift or estate tax deduction and an income tax deduction as well for that same situation? And the client says, yeah, how can I do it? And I say, it's simple. Put it into a charitable remainder trust where you retain the right to all the income for the rest of your life. So you accomplish your objective of you got access to the income from the asset for the rest of your life, goes to charity, and you get an income tax deduction, not of the full amount, but for the present value of what is expected to go to charity when you die. And it just, and what's interesting is for people of modest means who are not exposed to estate tax, a lot of them will have charitable bequests. They don't think about the fact that they don't get an income tax deduction. So it's another thing to suggest to the client. And the key is, you can't think of everything that you're going to recommend to the client on your own. You have to, in the course of your conversations with the clients, they're going to mention something which is going to trigger something that you normally would not have thought of, such as using a charitable remainder trust instead of an outright bequest to charity when you die. The process of gathering the information is the most important aspect of the estate plan.
Right, because there are certain situations where, especially if there's going to be the sale of an appreciated asset, the tax savings and deferral offered by a charitable remainder unit trust could almost pay for what goes to charity. And in some cases, it has more than paid for what goes to charity. I had a delightful conversation this week with a new client. I was delighted because what I find that wealthy clients who have not really been charitable yet are missing out on some joy and passion that they just wouldn't have in their lives. So my conversation went like this: well, you don't have a spouse, you don't have children. Where's this all going when you die? And he said, well, I guess to charity. I haven't really thought about it that much. Well, he, more than anyone, he loves his mother. His mother is in her late 70s. And he goes, my mother doesn't want to spend money, but she's kind of a do-gooder. So maybe when I die, if I die before my mother, I'll leave $5 million to a foundation and let my mother spend it on charity with my friends. And I said, well, why wouldn't you do that now? You've got tens of millions of dollars. Why wouldn't you go ahead and give your mother $300,000 in a donor advised fund or in a charitable foundation and let her go do her thing? And you may enjoy, and he's got nephews and nieces too, and get the nephews and nieces involved, and you may really enjoy seeing what they do and seeing what they make of it, and you may decide to leave $50 million into a lifelong foundation run by them. And he really did get a twinkle in his eye. So, I think you could tell clients if you're not doing charitable stuff, you're not active in charity, or you're not, doing something really cool that's charitable, you might be missing the boat or spending too much time in your boat. So,
a very important concern that Alan touched upon is, and we have a lot of clients that, they give, a few $100 or $1,000 outright to charity while they're alive. They take a nice charitable deduction for it. You can even if you take the standard deduction, there's a certain amount you can deduct for charitable contributions, because charitable deductions are itemized deductions, but there's an exception. But what happens is there are people of, modest means and, whose net worth is 2 million, 3 million, maybe 7 or 8 million, uh, and they're clearly uh, not really thinking charitable beyond, the few $100s or a few $1,000s a year they give to charity individually. And the key is that when you're doing the intake with the clients, and they have no intention of leaving large amounts to charity. Their annual giving of $100 here, $200 there, save the whales or whatever. Uh, they're not really charitably inclined to give more. And if you can show them that there are certain benefits uh, of having charitable giving, you might be able to convince somebody who is not really charitably inclined to leave to charity. And that's one of the functions that we have, is for people who can afford it, uh, how do we encourage them to give to charity? Okay.
By the way, there's a really good book uh, by a professor who has studied charitable giving called Why Good Things Happen to Good People. And he's documented by study that people who give and are involved with charities live longer and are happier. Now, I'm not sure, what the chicken and what the egg is there. When I was early in my practice, a couple of my wealthiest clients were very charitable. And they both told me that they were absolutely sure that the more they gave, the more the universe gave back to their business. And I was just doing some estate planning last week, actually for a very successful rabbi. And he told me that every year he makes a very generous gift to his synagogue, and he believes that the universe causes his stock portfolio to perform better as the result of that. So it's a very interesting correlation. But I've seen that my clients who, as they become more charitable, they do become happier, and in many cases they do become more successful. Just in case anyone would care to hear that, I think it's a legitimate theory. No one knows exactly how or why the universe works, but what comes around often goes around. Uh, the next thing I want to talk about, and I'll go ahead and I'm sorry, I've been sharing the screen. Didn't realize I was. Uh, there's a there's a really good quote by Robert Heinlein, who was a science fiction writer, my favorite, and it said his quote was, "Don't ruin your child's life by making it easy." And in doing estate planning for mental health professionals, especially, they have told me time and time again, I do not want to ruin the life journey of my children and grandchildren by making it too easy. People need a certain degree of stress and a certain degree of challenge. So I think it's really, really important, if your clients care about their descendants, to make sure that their descendants will have the opportunity to have a work ethic. And we have a number of estate plans where the children will be the beneficiaries of trusts that will be well over $100 million per trust, but the child will not receive more than $250,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, because the parents feel like ostentatious wealth and not having a reason to work will ruin a life and not help a life. One thing I've had to point out to clients, especially, and this will be successful physicians, hey, you make 2 million a year, that's great. You spend 1 million a year, you save 1 million a year, that's fine. When you die, your children are not going to be able to live that $1 million lifestyle. Yet you are leading them to believe that everyone needs a Maserati, everyone needs a private driver, everyone needs a jet airplane that they have access to. And when you die, or retire, your children will feel like failures. Have you considered that? And I tell my young physicians and my young entrepreneurial clients that, if you think you need an 8,000 square foot house to be happy, then you don't need a realtor, you need a psychologist. Because you know I grew up in a 2,000 square foot house. My father was an engineer who grew up in New York City. He thought 2,000 square feet was like the biggest building you could ever have, that you could have 5 people living in 2,000 square feet with 2.5 bathrooms. That was just absolutely paradise. And now people need 8,000 square feet. The other thing I say is, if you need a house small enough so that when your kids smoke pot, you can smell it and tell them to stop that. So, having these conversations during that first hour can be very useful for clients. Of course, now they have gummies, so you can't even know if they're smoking or not, which is another subject. But who is going to be that mentor for your children if you die and your children are in their 30s and 40s? First of all, they're going to be a mess when you die if they're dependent upon you financially right now, and then you go and die. And Jerry and I both know what happens when you meet these kids. They show up, and the first thing they say is, "It's nice to meet you." The second thing they say is, I'm so sad that Grandpa died." And then the third thing they say is, "Grandpa kind of told me that I could have a 50-foot boat and a mansion when he died, and where do I get started with that?" And then 5 months later, they're retired, they're at home eating potato chip, or they're, in France. I need them to sign a document. I can't get them to return the email or the phone call, or to sign, or to even do a DocuSign. So I come back to that big question, which Marcia and I always ask. That is, if both of us are gone, how much do we want our children to be able to spend? Is it better to leave them a big charity and to leave a moderate inheritance for them so that they, continue to work? Or who is it that will tame the lion? My friend Dan, who raised his children and does well. But I think that's as important as anything else you can discuss with the client, and that it's a conversation that needs to happen. And sometimes I say, well, what do you think they should get a month? Like, if you guys both die tomorrow, how much a month is a lot based on where they live and what sort of standard of living do you want them to have? Well, 25,000 a month sounds good when they're 45. Then when they're 55, 35,000 a month plus all education expenses of their children. So that's another conversation that we have. Jerry, do you have conversations like that, or where do those go?
Uh, it's very difficult to do it all in the initial contact, um, and you don't try to squeeze everything in. There's one little practical advice that I always tell my students, uh, and that is, when you're first meeting with a client, don't bring your cell phone with you. Leave it in your office, because the worst thing is that when your client is talking and you're looking at something on your cell phone. That's the worst possible thing. Leave your cell phone in the office.
I bring my cell phone, but I put it on airplane mode and I turn off notifications. And the reason I bring it is in case they bring something that I want to take a picture of, I take a copy of, or I need information. But I agree, do not be interrupted by the cell phone. But on the other hand, when the client, and especially when it's a physician or a business person, when they want to look at their cell phone, I say, hey, it's fine. Take a look, take a break. And then sometimes they will play on their cell phone, and I'll pull mine out until they're ready. But for the physicians, I always say, hey, it's patients first. If that's a patient matter, I'm glad to wait.
So, Alan, what do you want to do in the like the 10 minutes we have left?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, we could go longer than 10 minutes, but I'll go ahead and bring the state view on. So I went to stateview.link, and you'll put in the code that I gave you, or email me agassman@gassmanpa.com. I'll give you the code. And the greatest newest thing that Kevin and I have been working on is what we call.
Let me make a comment.
Yeah.
A lot of the information you need, if you do it in a face-to-face meeting, takes way too much time, and you can end up with a meeting that could last, if you want to get everything in, could last way too long. So what Alan has done is basically added to Estate View a way of gathering all of the necessary information in a very efficient manner where the client can do it on their own without you being present. Go ahead.
Right. And it's going to be another 4 to 6 weeks before we have it everywhere we need it. But when you let me go back again. When I click on Instant Plan, it starts with personal details, and then people can just type in names. I like to know nicknames. You know, the most important word to any person is their name. So if the guy's name is Joseph and I keep calling him Joseph, but the intake form says he likes to be called Joe, I'm losing a point every time I say Joseph. So we're going to ask for the nickname. And then we're going to ask them for their age. If they want to give me the date of birth, they can, but I don't want to force them to give me the date of birth. I'm instantly going to tell them their life expectancy. Clients are tickled by that. Oh my God, I only have 15.4 years left. So we want the form to be informative. Male versus female. Are you married? And then here's another one. What is your health situation? You know, a lot of people never ask, and then the client says, oh, by the way, I have a 3-year life expectancy. Well, you didn't ask me. So definitely ask what the health situation is. Jerry and I know if you have a short life expectancy, hooray, hooray, we could save all kinds of taxes. Just let us know. By the way, a lot of times I tell my clients to go up to Mayo, or I refer them to the best specialist I know in a given area, and they get better results because guess what? The top 10% of doctors are a little bit better than the bottom 10%. So then the spouse's information, and then you need to ask them, do you have a prenuptial agreement? People forget to tell you. Yes, I do. Was it signed? I need a copy. And I need to know, did you have a previous marriage? Because if you had a previous marriage, I want to know about it. Number one, because it's juicy, but number two, because I want to know if there's any alimony or child support. And if it's your third marriage, I kind of want to know because there may be a higher chance that you'll be getting divorced. And then on the family information with the children, I'm going to ask them for nicknames because what they do, Jerry, in the conference room is you're talking to them and you know they have these 2 kids, Sam and Mary. Well, they're talking about Butch and Todd. Well, who are Butch and Todd? Let me interrupt you. Who's Butch and Todd? No, that's my son-in-law. That's my nephew. That's my niece. That's the nickname for my child. So getting that stuff in writing before the meeting is going to save you a lot of confusion. Otherwise, you're too embarrassed to slow the client down, and they think you know everything. It's just
Alan.
like, yeah.
Alan. In other words, before the client meeting, you send them this chart to fill out as much of the answers as possible. How does the client get it?
Well, right now, to be honest, I'm sending them a PDF and Word version of my intake form that David Finkel designed in 2016. But beginning next month, they're going to get that and a portal to this, so they can fill this out on their own if they want to. And I'll fill it out for them to the extent I can.
All right.
So, and then again with the parent, I'm going to ask them, are you going to inherit or are you going to support these parents? And who are your parents married to? Because a lot of times your parents are not married to each other anymore. They're married to other people. And that's important because you want to know the story of who is who, and who are the emergency contacts, because those are the people who also may become important folks. And then think through in advance before the meeting, who would make your healthcare decisions, who would make your financial decisions. I don't want you to decide before you come to me, but I want to have an idea. So then, Jerry, on the financial end, while we ask for a lot of detail, what Estate View does is we're going to keep track of how much are you saving a year until what age, and then when you reach that age, how much are you saving or spending a year until you get to the next age. And if you die, what is that going to be for your spouse? Because that makes a huge difference to figure out where people are going to be financially. And then I want to know about their primary residence value, what they think the growth rate is, second home, who owns it, because it's important for me to know which spouse owns it, so they're able to tell me pretty quickly. And then their IRAs, ratios of stocks to bonds in the IRAs, investments outside of the IRA, and then, and Jerry, you know how important this is, I can say, do you have any high growth asset? Because a lot of clients have a company worth 3.5 million, they're going to sell it for 10 million in 3 years, and we want to know how to handle that situation. Okay, so then the next thing that we like to know is, if you need more life insurance, will it make economic sense? So I don't sell life insurance and I never will sell life insurance, but I want to talk to the client in the first meeting about how much life insurance I would have if I were them. You know, if they've got the situation where the spouse needs 400,000 a year and their investments are only 5 million and they're young, well, fine, get a $5 million term life insurance. Well, what does it cost? Well, if it's a 20-year term at your age, I'll click on add a life policy, and then I'll click on how many million I want, whether it's in a life insurance trust or not. And then that's now added to the scenario. And I tell them, go see an insurance agent and get this thing in process. So it shows them where that is. And then the charity conversation. Would you consider charity? What type of charity? Directly to charity? For estate planning, a lot of times we'll use a charitable lead annuity trust, or for an IRA payable to a charitable remainder trust. I can help them answer this, or they can answer this and they can tell us their charities and what they may want to leave to charity. And then another module is, what are you doing for college? How much have you put away in 529 plans and otherwise for each child and grandchild who aren't of college age yet? Or you think they're going to go public, private? You think they're going to go grad school? And how much do you need to put together now for each of these children, each of these grandchildren? Who's handling that? So that's what I have right now in the inputs. And then I have a review page, and this is going to save so much time and effort because this can be printed and I can look at this for 5 minutes before the meeting, and then I can walk in the meeting. I know their name, I know their nickname, I know there's a prior marriage, I know how many grandchildren they have, and then I click on results. When I click on results, the computer just did 50,000 calculations from the word result. And my first result, when I click on family tree, and this will be improved, but now I can walk into the meeting with a family tree, so I know who the parents are, who the children are, who the grandchildren are, great-grandchildren, nephews, nieces. I know who their contacts are, so I know who I'm going to deal with them. And then a lot of clients like to know what their required minimum distributions will be from their IRAs, if the growth rate is what they expect and based on their age. So I show that. up to their life expectancy. So I have something to talk to them about that, and they like to see what they're going to get out of their IRA. The next time you see this, it will probably also be showing a charitable distribution IRA, because a lot of clients like to see that. Then I click on Monte Carlo results, and I can show this client that based upon your IRA portfolio and how long you're going to have it, and your stock and bond portfolio, the average rate of return has been 9.17% in a Monte Carlo analysis. There's a 10% chance it's only going to yield 6.19%. There's a 10% chance it'll do 12% or better. It's not exactly. We don't know exactly. But here's a spreadsheet showing you if you leave this IRA intact for this number of years, here's what you may have after 21 years. It could be as low as 8 million, as high as 65 million. So let's plan accordingly. Then I'm going to show them, have they saved enough? So we go to the needs estimated savings tabulation based on their age, spouse's age, how much they want to retire on. Do they have enough? Now, these people are wealthy. Of course they have enough. Other people, not so much. So this gives them a cash flow analysis and where they are today, where they'll be on the retirement age, and where they'll be at probable date of death. Now, all of these calculators, and by the way, Jerry, we've also got Cupert's Qualified Personal Residence Trust calculator that immediately tells them what they can do with a Cupert. And we've got one for a self-canceling installment note sale. We've got one for a private annuity. And we've got one for a grantor retained annuity trust. So I don't have to go to the other calculators to have a first meeting with the client to show them what this technique may involve and how it may help them. But
Alan,
yeah,
the information that you just assembled in this, there is no way you can cover all this information in the first meeting. The key is to try as quickly as possible before your first meeting to get as much of the needed information as possible. Now, to be honest with you, a lot of clients, when they see how much is going to be needed, they're not going to do it. However, the point is even if they do some of it, it's very important. And then in the meeting, you can actually, the questions that they don't answer, you can kind of ask those as you go along.
right.
The objective is how to get all of the needed information in the most time efficient manner. And then showing the results of everything is separate. You do not really want to show all of the impact of a lot of the stuff in the initial meeting. It will overwhelm the client, even the most sophisticated.
But here's what I will show them. I click on Married Comprehensive, and the computer takes an educated guess as to what their comprehensive estate tax plan might be. And I can show them that if you don't do any planning, you live to your life expectancy, average Monte Carlo rate of return, $50 million estate tax, use a credit shelter trust, that brings the estate tax down to 48 million. Use a qualified personal residence trust, that brings it down to 41 million. Use annual gifting, that brings it down to 38 million. Discounted annual gifting brings it down to a little bit less than that. Use a life insurance trust. Think about a large gift based upon a percentage and a discount. Think about an installment sale that draws it all out. And then think about enough to charity to zero out the estate tax. So that certainly at least lets them know that we can add value. Then I click on generate client letter, and now it's drafting a letter describing all of that. And Jerry, now we've brought this first draft document, which, you know, used to take a day, day and a half, to literally 5 seconds.
Yeah. How many pages?
Is the letter?
Yeah.
27 pages. Can I?
Now,
Are you saying I should start?
here's the most important thing: is after the initial meeting, and the client, you're usually going to write a memorandum or a letter to the client saying, based on this, here's all the different things we can do. And you usually do that from scratch. So by taking all the information, whether it's complete or not, and all you have to do is input it, and it'll automatically generate the first draft of your planning letter. Something
Right.
that would take you 4 or 5 hours to do can now be done. The first draft can be done instantaneously.
Right.
That's
And
very important.
then there's another letter that it creates, which is a draft letter that you can send the client before or after the meeting, that talks about confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, whether each spouse should have a separate lawyer, the business purposes for your planning, who you might refer the client to. It becomes a very nice, like, checklist letter. And we're going to let our subscribers insert their own letter, but at least this goes ahead and kicks the letter out. So then, Jerry, the next thing we do is we click on Save to Calculators, and now all this data will go to our GRAT calculator, private annuity calculator, Cupert skin, required minimum distribution, single planning comprehensive, and we'll just click Save. And now all that information is in every calculator. So now any of these calculators that I go to, now I can go to my married client's comprehensive calculator, and the same information is here. And now I can drill down and go into more specifics. But at least I get started with exactly where I was. So, and by the way, everybody, I know a lot of you are subscribers, and this is the first time that Jerry has seen this new thing, because I don't like to show it to Jerry too early. I like to show it to him when we're maybe 70 or 80% done.
The key is what Alan is showing you is how you can gather all of the needed information, even in steps, in a very time efficient manner, how you can prepare memorandums and planning letters, how you can prepare everything in an integrated system that would normally could take 10, 15, even 20 hours, and have it all available in just a few hours. Now, for those of you who remember key punch cards, it's a little bit overwhelming. All right. I have something on my desk that a lot of my young associates ask me about. I bought it when I was in college. It was my calculator. It's all ivory, and I had a leather case, which I could carry it with me on my belt. And they all ask me, what is this? And I say, it's a slide rule. What can I tell you? All right. But
Yeah, in 20 years, somebody will look at this video and say, what clunkers these guys were trying to play with computers that weren't even, that had to be programmed. So Jerry, Jerry, people want to, yeah.
Pardon me?
People want to know I'm getting some questions on your contact information. So Jerry's contact information is jhash, JHESCH 62644 at gmail.com. And if you want to be more of a Jerry Hesh fan, Google Hesch, Hesch, Gassman, and you'll see all sorts of YouTube videos that we're on together. And then there's one that's a really good video of Jerry Hesch talking about the philosophy of Phil Heckerling, Heckerling. A lot of people have seen that and just have felt that it was just a wonderful talk about educating estate planners and Jerry's lifelong mission to that. Jerry's lifelong mission. Let me remind you, if you want for the next 48 hours to play with Estate View, put estateview.link in your browser, /JERRYHESCH, then click your heels 3 times, and you'll be in Estate View. So, Jerry, I've got some questions here.
We can take them.
Radhika says, you are the best to explain charitable giving. Loved every word you said about happiness and universal giving. Absolutely agree with you. So thank you very much. How do you find a good lawyer to set up an estate plan in Pennsylvania?
In Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania.
Well, it's interesting. I have, having taught in the graduate program in estate planning at the University of Miami for over 25 years, I have students all over the country, and a lot of people say I need a lawyer in Pittsburgh, and I say, oh, I have a former student in Pittsburgh. That's a nice way of doing it. One of the problems is if you to get recommendations is haphazard, and it's not easy. But I always tell my students the best way of generating additional new clients is to do a good job for your existing clients, and they will recommend you. Rely on your existing clients or people you've done work for. So basically, that's the best way of, and it's also a nice way of finding out somebody.
Right.
Just ask your friends who say, who has done your planning that you recommend? Did they actually spend the time with you? It's a difficult situation, but try your best.
Well, after law school, many lawyers after law school get a post-law degree in taxation or estate planning, and it's called an LLM. So, secondly, there's a company called Martindale.com. It's been around for probably 100 years. It used to be called Martindale Hubble, and they have us confidentially rate each other. And it used to be an A, a B, or a C. Now it's a 5, a 4, or a 3. So if you can find a lawyer who has a presentable website, so they look like they're really there, and they have an LLM in taxation or estate planning from one of the better schools, and the better schools include University of Florida, Georgetown, University of Miami, Boston University. Jerry will name a few more, Washington University. These LLM programs, I will say they are hard as heck to get through. I thought law school was hard. When I got the LLM at University of Florida, that was like 3 times harder than law school, all in a concentrated period of time. So if you find somebody who's got that LLM, a presentable website, and the 5 rating, AV, they used to call it in Martindale.com, that's going to give you a very high probability of success as far as finding an estate planner. The elder law specialty, which attracts a lot of people, is typically not as able to handle wealthy folks and much better able to handle bread and butter, smaller estate plans and people who may need to get on Medicaid. The other thing is board certification. So if I'm going to look for this lawyer in Florida, I'm going to also want a board certified trust and estate lawyer because Florida has had a board certification program many years. Also, the National Association of Estate Planning Councils has a certification program, and anyone who's done that is probably cares enough to be doing a good job. So that's the criteria that I use to try to find a lawyer for a client, other than to ask Jerry and other people, who they like. Jerry, let me see. Many people don't know how good their attorney is, and don't want to admit that they make a mistake. Therefore, recommendations can be very deceptive. Well, that may be true, but I think it's a good business advice that Jerry gave young lawyers. Do a great job for your client. And if you just do a great job for your client, after 5 or 10 years, you'll have plenty of your own clients. But I do agree, because I also tell my students when I teach that my client has no ability whatsoever to know if I'm a decent lawyer or not, but they know if I care about them. They know if I spell their name right. They know if I know how to get my work done. So it's not enough to be a good lawyer or a great lawyer. You've got to also care about your clients, do what you say that you're going to do, spell their name right, and proofread their documents as best they can. I think we've answered all the questions, Jerry. I want to thank the 134 people that are still on with us. You have a lot of patience. Let us know what you'd like us to cover next Saturday. And Jerry, any final sage words of advice?
The key is when you're explaining stuff to clients, you can almost overwhelm them with all these different techniques. And the real key is how you explain things to clients in an understandable manner. I mean, just don't say a Cupid or a Q-tip. Explain what they are.
Right. Absolutely. And for those of you, I think probably 40% of you watching are not lawyers or accountants or professionals. You're your clients or friends or laymen. It is a complicated area that we work in. It's not our fault that it's complicated, and sometimes there's advantages to the complexity. But thank you sincerely for your patience. And if you have an intellectual inkling to get more involved, there's a lot of reading you can do. And Jerry, we send a lot of our clients into Estate View with video instructions and with their estate plan in Estate View, and let them play around to get acclimated with it. Because if you're good with estate plans, you can get acclimated to that type of thing. By the way, I just dropped the word letter of the description of the estate tax plan that we ran into the share file. So that's there now. Jerry, thanks again. Have a fantastic day. And cannot thank you enough for all that you've done. First, for our profession, because you're probably the most popular law professor in estate planning in the history of the United States. And that's not an exaggeration. That's just the way it is. Secondly, for the genuine interest that you take in all your students and all your alumni, which you could have a whole alumni society, and we probably should form one for you. But then third, what you've done for me, what you've done for our law firm, what you've done for Estate View, it's just, just amazing what you've done for everybody. And I can't say thank you enough. We really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Al, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
All right. Everybody have a great rest of your day. And If you can use any of this information to help other people, please do. Thank you.
All right.
Turn it off.
All right, Alan? Alan?